Welcome to the show. I'm Doug Johnson. Each month we highlight a local celebrity or personality, depending, who has a success strategy that they will share with us for everyday living. Our guest this morning is a well-known chiropractor, local here in Twinsburg, and I've known him for a number of years. The neat thing about this guy is I have never seen him down in the dumps. I've never seen him angry. I've never seen him upset. He always maintains a calm demeanor and always has a smile on his face. So today we're going to talk with him about attitude. What's a good one and how to get one. So without further ado, I would like to welcome my guest this morning, Dr. Paul Bizjak. Paul, welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here, Doug.
You bet. Tell us why attitude is so important in everyday life.
You know, I would just say everybody wants to be healthy, and when it comes to wellness, people know exercise, they know nutrition and diet, but they neglect the fact that how we think about things and our attitude is just as important, if not more important.
I've always thought that you've had such a wonderfully positive attitude. Where does that come from? Were you always positive? Were you positive as a child?
I think so. I mean, you know, you said that you've never seen me angry, never seen me. I mean, obviously I get angry, and there's times that happens. No one's going to be up all the time, but you know, I mean, growing up, things were good, but I also had role models in my life that were positive. Okay. And that's how we tend to learn, or our behavior stems from what we see every day. And so between grandparents and aunts and uncles and my parents, I had that around me all the time, and the mood was pretty light, and so life was pretty good.
Can you tell us some of the things that they modeled for you? Some of their behaviors?
You know, my grandfather, one of my grandfathers, William Padovic, he was probably one of the most influential for me because he was always fun to be around. Didn't have a lot of material wealth, so to speak, but was happy, funny. And I watched him one time go through a procedure in a hospital where it was pretty serious, but he laughed and joked with the nurses. He had a great attitude, and I watched how it positively affected his outcome. And he responded better than expected in the treatment. His hospital stay, I think, was less than it would have normally been. And he basically had a philosophy that he never spoke of, but I think my mom put it into words, where there aren't too many things in this world that are that important. Okay. But the things that are important are extremely important. And those are things like family and friends and treating others the way you want to be treated. So, and that's just something I got to see on a regular basis. So.
Okay. At one time I heard a quote from a speech that you did, in fact, saying, accept the verdict and defy the sentence. And it kind of sounds like this is what your grandfather did, right, in that operation or that procedure that he had.
Right. I mean, for what we can't control a lot of times is what happens to us, but what we can control is how we respond to that. And that is something that can be built into kind of a response that we have. So how we respond to stimulus in our life is usually dictated by what we know and what we see. So there's a lot of times people snap out at a kid or something. They'll be like, wow, that sounded just like my dad. Well, it did sound like their dad because that's what they know.
Okay.
So, you know, you'll see people, you've known people that maybe have had an illness. And if the blood work shows that somebody has MS, to say that I don't have MS would be ridiculous. So you would accept the verdict, which is, okay, I have MS. But if you're told with MS, this is what you can expect, this is what's going to happen, this is what you do, whether or not you accept that part is up to you. So I see people every day that accept the verdict of, hey, I have cancer, or I have depression, or I have diabetes, but they defy the sentence that their doctor or the people around them have given them, and they've just changed their behavior, changed their attitude, and their outcome is different. So that's where that quote comes from.
So, and basically what you're saying is that is a choice that each of us can make.
No other animal other than us, we're the only species that has the ability that between a stimulus and a response, we have a gap, which is an ability to choose. Other animals don't have that ability. Now, I always refer to it as a tiny gap because it happens so fast. But it's a gap that usually is dictated by how we're conditioned, but we can change that, and we can respond differently, and we can change our behavior and our habit over time and respond differently. So if you have a stimulus, like somebody cut you off on the highway, there's a response. It could be anger, it could be fear, it can be amusement that they're in such a hurry, it can be all kinds, but there's a gap there that gives you that quick moment to decide how I'm going to respond to that. So
you can just slough it off or road rage.
Absolutely. And then the choice is it tends to be habitual or how we respond, but you can change how you respond to those things. And the outcome isn't going to matter because you may get cut off on the highway, fester about it, get to work. Your whole day is dictated by that. And you're calling this person names, and your blood pressure is elevated, and your attitude, and you're angry. Meanwhile, that person is off to work and doesn't even know you existed. So the outcome is no different. You know what I mean? So responding poorly doesn't improve the outcome. So,
well, and that's an example, obviously, on the way to work. And you and I have talked about the fact that you don't listen to morning news, and it kind of is in that same vein.
It is.
That it affects your whole day. And what do you do?
So, if I try to pay attention to things I can change and I can't change, and when I watch the news, it's always miserable. So. There was a time right before bed I remember watching the news. It was terrible, and I go to bed and I got this bad feeling, and nothing is going to change what I just saw. So me watching it improved my life in no way. So I don't bury my head in the sand, and I pay attention to world events, but it doesn't help me. And I kind of liken it to bad food for your brain, junk food for your brain, and so. On the opposite side, you can actually give your brain good food or positive food by listening to uplifting, positive material, even comedy stuff or sermons from a pastor that you can get those online or you can download those, or audiobooks or shows that kind of give more positive information.
One of the shows that you and I have talked about has been Brian Johnson and Philosopher Notes. And that seems to be kind of in that same vein that you're talking about.
Yeah, Brian Johnson, he wrote a book called A Philosopher's Notes, and what he's done is he's taken a lot of the probably the top 100, 200, or maybe now even 300 positive psychology, positive books, and he basically wrote like a Cliff Notes for them. So you can now download an audio, which is a summary of these books. So now you don't have to read the whole books. Now what has happened is some of these books will resonate a little higher with you, and then you go out and you get the book, but you get what he calls the big ideas out of the book, and they're great because now when you listen to that stuff, it gets you thinking, it gets you in a better mood.
Brain food.
Yeah. And so you show up, and for me, if I'm showing up with patients, honestly, I want to show up 100%. And I felt like one of the last elections, I was getting caught up in the news. And I felt like my first few patients weren't getting me at 100% because it was crazy. You listen to one story in one news feed and the same story spun a different way. And it wasn't worth the time. So I just find I show up a lot better. And that just goes with everything. Like I don't look at bills. I don't do things like that before patients or in between patients. I don't take phone calls. I don't look at emails because I don't want anything to kind of throw me off, so to speak, because I know that next person, it may take 10 minutes to get back on track, and that may be a couple patients, and they really won't get me at 100%. So,
interesting. Yesterday, I was out and about and listening to NPR, a radio show, and there was some talk, an interview actually, with Dr. Christiane Northrup. and she wrote a new book called Goddesses Don't Age. And in the book, she talks about a study in which there were a group of men in their 70s and 80s, and the study was done back in 1989. Before the study, all of the vital signs and measures were taken and measured. The men were divided into two groups, and the first group lived life ordinarily, and they were in a special venue, but just lived like they would every day. The second group of men had pictures of themselves posted around of them in their 30s and 40s, their prime years. They watched TV shows from the 50s, which were their prime years. They read magazines from their prime years. And 2 weeks later, the men who had done that looked 10 years younger. When their vitals were taken, they had all significantly improved. So can you talk about that some more?
I mean, that is the power of our thoughts and the
Okay.
power of the way our mind works and how it affects our physiology. And this is why, that study, I think we discussed another study like it. I think it was earlier than that, where they took a group of older men in their 70s to a monastery that they transformed. Everything was back to when they were in their 20s. The Ed Sullivan Show was playing on the TV. The TV was from that era. I mean, everything, and no mirrors. And they did the same thing where they measured pre and post blood work. And there's physiological changes that happen. So I like the title of her book about the Goddesses Don't Age, because there's this anti-aging kind of myth. I mean, we're all going to age, so the way it should be spoken is the slow down aging, because we are going to age. But things like stressful events and how we think affects how fast we age. So scientifically, cells divide. And we have a cell has so many cell divisions before it just wears out. And so it's kind of like on a copy machine. Like the next copy isn't as good as the first copy, and eventually it's unreadable. And that's what happens with our cells. And so the key to not aging is to slow down cell division. So cell division speeds up with things like poor lifestyle, poor eating, stress, and even our thought process. So you've seen people go through a traumatic event, or whether it's divorce or maybe an illness with a child or a parent, and you'll say, boy, they look like they aged 10 years. So that study basically shows the exact opposite and how we can do that. And it boils down to our thought process. So they were in a controlled environment, but so what we have to do is kind of we have to kind of create our own environment. And we can't take ourselves back to a certain time.
Right.
But the way our minds work is we kind of can. So we can not fester on what bothers us. We can't focus on aging or how bad we hurt or what 50 should feel like or 60 should feel like. We can actually, in our minds, trick our body into functioning better. And it changes. I mean, our blood work changes. I watched a TED Talk this morning, a Dr. Cuddy from Harvard, who talks about our posture even. And what they did was they took saliva samples, and when someone sat in a powerful position, which is leaning back with their arms behind their head or with their hands on their hip, which he referred to as the Wonder Woman pose, with their legs apart a little bit, and they held that for 2 minutes, their testosterone levels went up 20%, and cortisol, which is the stress hormone that speeds up cell division, reduced by 25%. And this was 2 minutes of posture. And if they went into a more passive, where they hunched up or they put their hand on their chin, I think it was their testosterone went down 10% and their cortisol went up 15%. So, I mean, our physiology changes with the way we behave, the way we hold ourselves, and the way we think. And that is so powerful.
And that was 2 minutes.
That was 2 minutes, right. And so, and doctors will often disregard this, or they'll kind of poo-poo it like it's no big deal, but it is a major component of health and wellness and well-being that is so simple but overlooked.
So the major question then is, why aren't we doing this?
Oh, I think, we get caught up in our stressful lives. We get caught up in stressful events, and um, I don't think there's enough emphasis put on it. It's almost too simple. Simple things. I mean, you can't patent
Right.
positive attitude. You can't, and so, it's not focused. I mean, there were studies at Duke University that compared antidepressants versus exercise. Exercise fared as good as the antidepressants. Over a long term, they actually fared better than antidepressants. But exercise isn't very profitable, you know what I mean, whereas
Right.
medication is. And I hate to sound like that, but that's so doctors will often say, here, take this medication.
Right.
Well, what about exercise? Well, yeah, you could exercise too, but exercise is as powerful as some medication. So, and the thought process is the same way. So and no one focuses on that. In a doctor's office, you're getting blood work, so they want to know what's your blood pressure, your cholesterol.
Right.
So I have patients all the time that they'll say, hey, I had a full physical, and the doctor said, I'm healthy. What they meant was their blood pressure's good, their blood cholesterol's good, and their blood sugar's good. Never mind the fact that they hate their job and their family's a disaster and
Right.
they have no
And
sense
their
of
priorities.
purpose. Right.
Yeah.
So health is bigger than just that blood work stuff, but it's just, I don't know why more people don't do it. I don't think they understand the value of it. I mean, the fact that you can change your physiology with it and the blood comes back different is amazing. So there's a lot of things like that where I go, why isn't this front page news?
Right.
I think it comes down to it's just not super profitable, so a lot of people, who's going to talk about it?
Obviously, we are.
Right.
So, what exactly, if you had to give us a point or two to change our attitude, to reduce our stress, to slow down our aging process, what real simple, fast, easy things could we do?
And it has to be fast and it has to be easy or people won't do it.
Right.
I would say there are some very simple things you can do. One of the things we talk about anytime I do a talk, whether it's for a company or a group of people or a church, is gratitude exercises. It takes literally 2 minutes where you, in the car on the way home, you just think for a couple minutes on the things you're grateful for in your life. I tend to do that on the way home from work because, I like what I do and I'm usually not too bummed out on my way home, but I don't want to walk in the door tired, frustrated, exhausted. And so what this does is it simply, it boosts my attitude instantly. It changes my physiology, changes my state, and everybody has something they can be grateful for. Even in tough times, there are things to be grateful for. So it costs nothing, takes 2 minutes, and there have been studies, I don't have any to reference, but your physiology changes when you do that. Your blood pressure probably reduces, your hormones that are positive hormones elevate, stress hormones reduce, and so that's simple. Another thing would be as far as stress goes, because we can't remove, there's 2 ways to get rid of stress.
Okay.
One is to get rid of the stressor. But that's not always easy. If it's a job or if it's someone in your family or something like that, it's not easy to just get rid of immediately. So the other option is to change your response to the stressor, like we were talking about earlier. So, and we can do that. So it's there's a study I just heard about within the last couple days about stress and how we interpret the stress will affect how it affects our bodies. So 2 people can have the same amount of stress, but one person views the stress as bad and negative. It has an adverse effect on their body and causes health problems. The other person views it as a challenge, as not as a bad thing, but as a good thing.
Right.
And that same stressor has no adverse effect on their body. So I kind of even was rocked by that a little bit because, how we interpret the stress that we're getting can affect it. So I would tell people, change how you look at the stress. Instead of looking at it as a problem, if you switch it over to make it more of a challenge, it changes how it affects you. Plus, you're going to be more productive with that stressor because now it's a challenge, so you can figure out a way to overcome it.
Can you give us more of an exact example of how to change our viewpoint?
You know what? Work, for instance.
Okay.
If I was going to work every day, if I look at my work like I need to earn an income, I need to provide for my family, I should have a job, this is my job, that's one way of viewing that.
Right, and that would be very stressful.
Right.
Yeah.
Another way is I'm going every day with an opportunity to serve others. I'm surrounded by people that are grateful for what I do. I'm in a position of influence to help people make their lives better. All I did was change how I viewed that. It happens with like nurses too. You know, I was thinking about this morning. You know, a nurse, it depends on how they look at it. They have this shift. I got to go to work today. How many days? As opposed to, I am changing lives. I am serving my fellow people. I am doing what I am on this earth to do. That changes the whole thing.
It does.
Same event, but just a different definition.
Uh-huh. So can you do the same thing with the gratitude? A specific example, just so that we can go back and look at ourselves doing that, and how would we do it?
You know what? One thing I wrote about too, like on the way home is a good time to do it. First thing in the morning before you go to bed are really good because it starts your day or ends your day.
Yep.
But I tend to do it on the way home. And one of the things I'll do, and I called it panning out, because we get so focused on what we're thinking about and what we're doing all day. So if you're driving, you're looking at the speedometer, you're kind of looking at the dashboard, you're with the radio. But it happened one day where I kind of looked around for a second and realized the sun was setting, clouds in the sky, you know what I mean? So I really kind of just panned out and just kind of looked around and took more in. That kind of opens you up, changes your breathing, and then just think about that day. So you could focus on, oh, I hate dealing with insurance. I had this problem with the x-ray machine or something like that. Or it was a matter of, or the people that maybe weren't doing as well as you thought. But if you focus on the number of people I saw that day, the projects that I have going on, the fact that I've got a staff in my office that is as passionate about helping others as me, which makes my job a ton easier.
Right.
You know, the other doctor in our office, I mean, I've got another doctor, Dr. Brady, in the office that's he's phenomenal. He's the best associate we've ever had in our office. So I feel fortunate that I have him in the office. Now we're able to help more people. So I just think about anything that I can be grateful for. The fact that I'm going home to my family, you know, my wife, my kids. We have a great family. I've got my parents, my brothers and sisters. So I just focus on anything that's good. Okay. And there's always good to focus on, even if you have a really lousy day.
You might have to dig, but it's there.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's where you can go to a news. If you're going to look at the news and then go, okay, I've got it pretty good. You know, you read a couple of these stories, you can just go, okay, so it's raining today, big deal.
Yeah,
you know.
So interesting way to frame it.
Yeah.
And sure makes a difference.
Right.
We've talked about authenticity and leading an authentic life. What does that mean?
I think nowadays with the internet and when people resonate with people, it's because they're authentic. And so I think with the internet, with these short burst videos and interviews and podcasts, you get people, real people. It's hard, like even when I write articles, it's hard to capture stuff but I think being honest and authentic. You can't be fake. You've got to be real. If you see somebody and they have a hideous sweater on, you don't say I love that sweater. I mean, little things like that.
Right.
But in being honest with people, even in a healthcare profession, you know, our job really isn't to help every person. It's to try to help every person. And I think my patients know that I will give 100% to figure out their problem. And even if that means sending them somewhere else or doing a little research for them, because I want to treat them the way I would want to be treated. And so if I base all my decisions off of them, that's going to be authentic. I don't have to wonder what I said. I don't have to wonder how I acted last time. And the reality is everything isn't always perfect. Mistakes will be made. And patients understand that and people understand that. But if you're doing your best and you're giving it your all, you're going to do okay.
Well, so Paul, we've covered a lot of territory today.
Right.
If you had to give our viewing audience one strategy for success that you thought would help them be more successful, more happy or happier, I guess the term would be, in their life, what would that one thing be?
I mean, that's kind of tough. The gratitude exercise is so simple, but you know what? I know this is on a different topic, but exercise is super important too, because
Okay.
because when you exercise, it changes how your brain functions, and hormones balance and things work out in a way where you will think more positive. So exercise can actually be a foundation to kind of jumpstart positive thinking, because anytime anybody exercises, they usually don't get done and say, I feel terrible. They may say it the next day when they can't move, but they feel good.
Right.
And they crave healthier foods. And the food we eat and how much we move, that dictates how our brain functions. So I think they kind of have to exercise on some capacity every day. And the studies that show how much cancer helps in the reduction of cancer and depression and all this stuff is not bodybuilding or running marathons. It's 30 minutes of walking 3 to 5 times a week. So anybody can do that. So I know you asked for one thing, but that's tough. The exercise is important, and the food we take in is important. You know, I mean, I know that when I take in a lot of sugar, it affects my energy level and even my moods. So, you know, people are trying to take care of their kids, and they're not addressing these simple things like exercise and nutrition, and even getting the kids to focus on what their gratitude or what they're grateful for. So I know that's not one thing, but
Helpful, certainly. Paul, thank you so much for being here today.
No problem.
Great show, great thoughts.
Glad to be here.
And something for us all to work on.
Definitely.
Thanks again.
You bet.
How many times have you been driving along the road, minding your own business, driving in a perfectly straight line in your lane, and the driver in front of you, starts to weave? You have two choices. Either you follow or you pass. If you pass, you pull up eventually to a light and look over, and what do you see? You see a person texting. Drives me absolutely insane. Well, we've all seen stories about people texting and bumping into things or falling into fountains. There's a recent news story that I've come across, and sadly, a police officer has stopped to help someone at an accident scene, and lo and behold, a young man texting hits and kills the police officer. So what do you think, folks? Isn't it about time we do something about this? For Pete's sake, stop texting and driving.